this is only a male God. It's missing its better half. Remember? It's missing its polarity. And so, imagine that you wanted to leave a code on a planet that's not so evolved, but you wanted to leave the code so that it would give them great power at an important time in history. But you wanted to make sure that it could not be decoded until they were ready for it. How would you do it? When maybe one way you would do it would be to give the code in a polarity way so that you would have to have a civilization come to the realization of the equalities of polarity before they could decode the code. So, and that would most likely be a society that's ready for that type of power. So, when you take the male tetragrammaton and you add the female one, or the positive and the negative one, then you have to add a second isotropic vector metric. So the result is that you would have to double this number. 72 twice is 144. 144 is in the book of Revelation as a very important number for the new and the changes of the new world. When you put 64 tetrahedrons together and you get this fractal vectorial array, you get exactly 144 faces on its outside surface. And so that was getting compelling. But the Kabbalistics didn't stop there. The Kabbalistic traditions said, well, actually, if you want to truly understand the power of the Tetragrammaton, the power of God, if you want to understand the root of creation, you must decode this tree, which was thought to be the tree of knowledge, which is analogous to the tree at the center of the Garden of Eden. This was thought to be the foundation of creation, and that if anyone could decode this, they would hold the key to creation. There's a lot of writing in Kabbalistic tradition that says as well that it shouldn't be attempted to be decoded because most people that have gone crazy. And so I took those warnings seriously, and I thought, well, I'm most likely already crazy. Well, I live in a van, you know. I'm studying all this crazy stuff. I must be okay, you know. It won't hurt me that much. So I went at it. And I studied and I studied and I studied and I tried to figure it out. And I couldn't really figure it out. I was really bugging on it because it was getting so complex. So many texts I was reading about this were so complex and so philosophical, and they had all these realms and dimensions and all this. I couldn't figure it out. And then I decided to draw it, and I plastered it on the ceiling of my van so that when I would wake up in the morning, I could just stare at it and try to figure it out. And so I'm in the van in the morning and I look at it, and then, fairly rapidly I realize that there's a tetrahedron on the bottom of it. Okay? This part here is a tetrahedron. if it's seen in 3D. And then I looked up here and I realized that in 3D, those lines would generate as well an octahedron. See, the thing is that most people don't see this thing as a 3D object. So flatten it makes not much sense. But in 3D, it describes very specific geometry. So because I had this type of 3D mind, and I was always very intended on not doing the flat thing, I was trying to visualize this in 3D. But I couldn't figure out this middle box thing. I just couldn't figure it out. For weeks, months. Just like, laying in my bed looking at this thing. And studying and all this. And then one day, I said, wait a minute. I realized that one of those boxes in the middle here, okay, matches the box in the top portion of the octahedron. So I thought, what if I slid the middle part box in the upper box and see what it generates? So I split them in two, and then I slid the bottom part into the top part. And when I did so, it was like a key, right? It just locked in and generated all the vectors necessary to have a tetrahedron and an octahedron, one on top of each other. So now I had all these vertices for 3D geometry. These are the only geometry necessary to produce a 64 tetrahedron grid. So I knew I was close. So I got really excited, and I continued studying and intensely studying, and I realized something is that the Kabbalistic text doesn't say there's one tree at the root of foundation, the foundation of the universe, or at the root of the universe. There is 4 trees at the root of the universe. And they said that the 4 trees were attached at the same root. Now I thought, well, wait a minute. Maybe they're still giving us only half the code. Maybe there's 8 trees, and they're only giving us the polarity, the half polarity of the code. I looked at my structure again that I had come up with from sliding the bottom into the top, and I realized I had extra lines. And these extra lines match the lines to generate the star tetrahedron. So if I got all the branches of the tree, and then I attach the 8 trees together, I would have 8 star tetrahedrons coming together to generate the 64 tetrahedron grid. And what told me had decoded this right was that by the time I was finished, I could now plaster the Kabbalistic tree right over top of the 64 tetrahedron grid and get all the 9s of the 2D tree out of the 3D geometry. It worked. And hooked all together, it generated all the intersection necessary to build a 64 tetrahedron grid. And when I calculated this, then I saw that it could be done in many different ways. But one thing that was for sure, the Kabbalistic text said actually there's 10 spheres. They're called sephirots, and they come from the word sapphire. Okay? So actually it's talking about crystals again. And it says that these sephirots are the joints between the pathways of creation. And it said that there was this 10 sephirot to one tree, but because they're all hooked to the same center, to the same root, which is called the crown